Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our last session today, where we're going to be bringing it all together. We're going to be bringing all of the learning and research that we've been sharing with you over these last 2 weeks on the Sustainable Wash Systems project all together today. So thank you so much for joining us from near or far. We have one kind of little activity we'd like to invite you to do today is please take a moment to fill out a brief survey. And this, I'm dropping the link of the survey in the chat box where we're inviting you to describe in just a few sentences what you think are the most important factors and interactions for supporting sustainable wash service delivery and why. We are going to be publishing the results of your feedback live in today's session and just about midway through today's session. So we'd love to get some feedback from all of you. So as people are coming in today, I'll go ahead and reiterate that, but thank you so much for joining us today. So thank you for joining us, Rachel, Joseph, Johannes, John, thank you for coming back. Enrica, Wendy, thank you so much for joining us. So just be taking a few minutes to get people to kind of come in and get settled. While we do that, I'm gonna just go on repeat here again and welcome you to our final Sustainable Wash Systems bringing it all together. This will be our final session. We'll be summarizing key findings from the research and evidence that was done over the last 5 years. I am dropping in a link for those of you new to join us, so thank you, Kevin, to a link to a brief survey where we're inviting take a minute to describe in just a few sentences what you think are the most important factors and interactions for supporting sustainable wash service delivery and why. We're going to be publishing this information a little bit later today in today's session. So it would be really great to get your feedback. Thank you, everyone. I hope everyone is having a wonderful Thursday. We have quite a few attendees that are coming in right now, so I'm going to go ahead and go on repeat. So welcome back. Thank you so much for joining us for our final session on the Sustainable Wash Systems Closeout Series and Learning event. Today, we're going to be sharing with you a summary of the key findings from the research that has been conducted since over the course of the last 5 years. I am dropping in a link this morning to a brief little survey that we're inviting you to complete. We'd like to hear from you in just a few sentences what you think are the most important factors and interactions for supporting sustainable wash service delivery and why. So we're just inviting participants to go ahead and share with us your thoughts in the survey. We're going to be publishing these surveys, publishing the results of this survey later today in today's session. Welcome, everyone, to our final session today, where we're going to be bringing it all together. We are going to be sharing with you a summary of key findings from the Sustainable Wash Systems project over these last 5 years. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to go ahead and drop in the chat box a link to a brief survey that we're inviting all participants to take a few minutes to complete. We are asking you in this survey to just describe in a few sentences what you think are the most important factors in interactions supporting sustainable wash service delivery and why. We are going to be publishing those findings later today in our session. So we'd love to hear from you and invite you to kind of take a minute or two to complete this survey. Welcome back, and thank you for joining us, everyone, for our final session for the Sustainable Wash Systems Closeout event and learning series. Today, we're going to be bringing it all together and share with you a summary of the key findings from the last 5 years of research and evidence. I'm going to be turning it over here in just a minute to our Master of Ceremony, Brittany, who will be opening today's session and kicking everything off. While we wait for just more people to kind of enter, we have quite a few attendees that have registered for this event. We are inviting everyone to go ahead and click on the link that I have just dropped into the chat box and share with us, describe in a few sentences what you think are the most important factors in interactions for supporting sustainable wash service delivery and why. We are going to publish the results of this survey later in today's session, so we really hope that you can contribute. So with that, Brittany, I think I'm gonna go ahead and turn it over to you to kick us off for our final session today to make sure that we stay on track. We have a packed agenda. Hey, so thank you, Brittany.
Thank you, Katie, and good morning, afternoon, or evening, everyone. My name is Brittany Azrud. I'm the Chief of Party for the Sustainable Wash Systems Learning Partnership. And I'm very excited to welcome you to the final session of our Closeout event and learning series. So we've covered a lot of ground over the past 2 weeks. We kicked things off on Monday, the 20th, with an overview of SWS partners and heard testimonials on our bright spots, challenges, and lessons learned from implementation. And this was followed by 3 deep dive sessions on the topics of systems understanding and engagement, professionalized maintenance, and yesterday on collective action. In between sessions, you received email blasts with links to resources and responses to some of the many questions that we've received in the chat. And that brings us to today. So the title of today's session is Bringing It All Together, and we hope to do just that by summarizing our key findings and providing some tangible recommendations for the sector to continue this important work. Tomorrow we'll be sending our final learning note, and that will include links to recordings for this week's sessions, as well as a bibliography of SWS resources so you can continue your own learning on these topics. In a moment, I'll hand it over to Chip Walker from USAID to provide a keynote address. We'll then hear from Carl Linden and Amy Javernick-Will from the University of Colorado at Boulder, who will share those key findings and recommendations. We'll also share some preliminary results from the Systems Understanding survey that you just filled out at the start of this session, and we'll then hear from our Agreement Officer's representative for SWS, Ryan Mahoney, to offer some closing remarks. The second half of this session will be a World Cafe in which you can select from a few new topics to deepen your learning on some of the themes that we've touched on over the last 2 weeks. Okay, so you can access, again, this is a reminder, all biographies for today's speakers at the Google site we created for this event, and we'll share the link in the chat now. And with that, I have the great pleasure of introducing our keynote speaker for today's session. Chip Walker is a senior policy analyst in the Bureau for Policy Planning and Learning at USAID, where he supports the articulation and implementation of U.S. development policy. He leads USAID's efforts to implement the local systems framework, which is their commitment to sustained development that puts local systems at the center of its work. We've asked Chip to discuss how systems thinking fits in with the increasing attention to localization, both for USAID and globally, the contributions SWS has made to systems practice, and any remaining gaps for others to address. So welcome, Chip, and I'll now hand it over to you.
Well, great. Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you to everyone who's been responsible for bringing together both the project and also the last 2 weeks. Can we go to my first slide, please? Oh dear, why am I not getting video? Oh, there we go. Great. So I wanted to start just by emphasizing one point for our audience, and that is that I am a member of the SWS Advisory Committee and have been since the beginning, and it's been a real pleasure to be a part of that group. But I am not by any imagination a WASH expert. And so I was invited in part because, as Brittany alluded, I have been heavily involved in trying to advance systems thinking and systems practice in the agency, and I think they wanted somebody who reflected that perspective to be a part of, to provide some ideas and some guidance as the project moved forward. But I wanted to sort of begin, since I have been at the beginning, just to sort of reinforce some of the points that I've heard other speakers made, and that is to, I think, recognize the remarkable amount of change that has occurred within the WASH community, within USAID around systems thinking and systems practice over the course of the last 5 or 6 years. When I first was told about the project, I was a little concerned and a little skeptical about where this was all going to go, because it still seemed as if a lot of the emphasis was on more technical areas of WASH and not so much on the systems aspect. But I have to say, and I want to compliment the leadership across the 5 years, particularly Dan Hollander and Elizabeth Jordan, who played central roles as both the chief of party and as USAID's manager of this project to sort of help get it to where it is today. And then, of course, Brittany and Ryan at the closing stages to make sure that all of it came together. So what I really wanted to also stress is that over the course of the last 5 years of this project, I have the privilege of being able to see where systems practice has taken hold and is growing within the agency. And I would say that WASH systems in that course has become one of our bright spots, along with our work on health systems and on food and market systems. And I have been particularly pleased with the willingness and of the team members to not only to advance work within their sector, but to share their work with the agency as a whole, because I think the agency has an opportunity, and I think the broader community has an opportunity to learn from some of the insights that we have had. The title of my talk was basically to talk a little bit about moving from proof of concept to systems practice. And I bring this up, and the reason I picked that title is because at least I would characterize the efforts of the SWS project largely at the beginning as being somewhat experimental, to essentially ask the question, how useful are some of the basic tools of systems work applicable to the WASH sector. And ultimately, at least from a systems perspective, the two that they have very much emphasized and have been parts of the deep dives have been on social network analysis and on working and thinking about collective action. And what I think where we are and what I would challenge all of us, not only in the WASH sector, much more generally, is that we need to start moving away from this idea of proof of concept to essentially embracing a much more comprehensive and thorough systems practice. And I think that one of the places that I got a little bit of inspiration for this was just something I ran across a few days ago, and talking about about Tao, the concept from East Asian religion and philosophy, about the idea of the fact that the Tao is just the natural order of the universe. And I just sort of feel that if we are really true systems thinkers, systems practitioners, that we need to essentially adopt this kind of an orientation. It's not just something that is an analytical tool or an analytical device that one applies here and there. It is basically the way that one comes to understand the way the world operates and the way that one tries to understand it and the way that one engages with it. Now, next slide, please. In USAID language, we don't call it the Tao, we basically call it systems practice, but it is a similar sort of an idea, and it is an effort to blend both the way that we think as well as the way that we work. And in some sense, picking up the idea of a systems practice, much the way you would talk about somebody who's engaged in a legal practice or a medical practice, because in those fields, practice is not just simply the ideas that you learn in a book. It's basically how you apply those in the course of your day-to-day job, and also evolve those ideas based on your experiences. So that is the basic concept. And what I want to talk about in the few minutes that I have is sort of how we can apply and think about moving to our systems practice in three ways. So one, I want to begin very briefly by talking about sort of our fundamental orientations to understanding the nature of sustainable development or sustainable WASH. I want to talk a little bit about how we, where we are right now in terms of moving towards developing a systems practice, full-fledged systems practice. And then I want to conclude with an area where we are grappling right now about how to make systems practice more alive. And I want to share just sort of for those of you who are interested in USAID, where we are thinking right now. So we could go to the next slide, please. So I think that Louis Borstein yesterday made much the same comment, and it's not unique. I mean, I think lots of people have come to the realization that you can sort of think about development, you can think about almost any problem from two different perspectives. One of them is to treat it as a technical issue, and at least in development, this has been the sort of traditional way to sort of treat all problems, whether it's in education, whether it's in food, whether it's in WASH, health, as it's basically a technical problem where we are transferring best practices. We're trying to figure out what is global best practice, and therefore trying to figure out how to transfer and apply those in other circumstances. And that is the orientation. It's oftentimes characterized as finding solutions and delivering solutions. Even the language that we use talks about it in those terms. And then there's sort of an alternative view that really sees change, development and social change is primarily embedded in the local politics and social processes that are alive in the countries in which we work. It's very context specific. It's very much involved about understanding and working with and supporting local actors and their aspirations. And I think that there are fundamentally these two approaches. And as I mentioned earlier, my concern was when I was first involved in this project that we were going to be going down the route of group number 2 there. But I was very pleased to see that actually this has been a continuation of work in the first category. And I think that we still have these tensions alive in development more generally within USAID as to how we understand, how we approach this work. Systems, as you know, ironically emerged primarily out of engineering and other more hard sciences, and really much more along the lines of Group 2 there on the right. But the reason that we have come, and the reason that I think systems work has come and had traction within the agency, is for people who see this as a very important way of understanding and supporting those factors and that way of understanding development that are in the first group. And so I think that one of the things that I would put forward is for all of us, but particularly in the WASH sector, is I think you have to make a choice. Do you understand, do you see this thing as essentially a process of social change that has certain technical elements in it, or do you want to understand it as a technical problem for which occasionally you have to pay attention to social practice? I think that it is a choice. I mean, again, I am not a WASH expert and I'm on somewhat thin ice at this point, but I just want to say that I think we need to continue to push for greater understanding of the first category. So next slide. So we have developed this sort of graphic some years ago to help capture the elements of what we consider to be a systems practice. It's not particularly overly original. It looks very much like lots of other cyclical processes in development, including USAID's own program cycle. But I think it is still, nevertheless, a useful way to understand. I think importantly to how to approach a systems practice. So we're going to go through each of these four elements of it very briefly, and I want to talk a little bit about both where I see where we are right now, contributions that SWS has made to this work, and where we see some gaps, some more than others. So next slide, please. So let's begin with listening. Listening, I think, is really one of the fundamental, and it's important to understand that listening is really is about how you do not begin with a presumption about what the nature of the problem is. That it is very much a process of gaining understanding of the context, the processes, the actors, the dynamics that are going on. And I think that actually, since this is often the beginning point with all of our engagements, this is actually the area that as far as systems practice is concerned, is the most well developed. We have become, over the last few years, much more comfortable with bringing in a variety of different assessment methodologies, some of them more general, like political economy analysis that help us to understand political processes and political pressures that may be at work, but also related to systems tools, such as causal loop diagramming, or network analysis. And so clearly the work that SWS has been doing on using this particular tool and developing it in various settings in Africa has been very helpful in terms of both demonstrating that its utility to help us understand water systems and the connections and relationships between people, but also I think increasingly figuring out how to make it more approachable as a technique, both for those who wish to apply it, but also for those who are participating in some kind of a mapping exercise. So that's not to say that we don't have more work to do, because I think that the challenge is that no one tool is sufficient and adequate to be able to do this process, but how do we integrate them in a more effective way? I think that's one step that we need to apply. We go on to the next one. The next stage is the engaging stage, and this goes everywhere, all the way from sort of designing your interventions and beginning to implement them. As I said, I think this is an area where I think we've begun to make some progress, but there's a lot more work to be done here. This is an area actually where I think the SWS work on collective action has been particularly helpful, along with work that other organizations have been doing to sort of help to support collective impact. Because essentially the challenge that we have is how in a system is how do we essentially support change throughout the network, throughout the actors. You can't just simply focus your attention on a single actor and say, well, if we can increase this individual or this organization's capacity, then we will have the necessary impact on the system. And this is a huge and challenging problem, full of collective action problems, of free riding and so forth. And so how do you support those processes? What's really necessary? And what are the roles of particular actors? And I think that at least for an agency like USAID, which has historically tended to focus its work on particular entities, particular in non-governmental organizations, particular levels of government, shifting out and beginning to think about how to support networks, how to support these constellations of organizations is a real challenge. But the work that SWS has done on collective action and showing how it is feasible, some of the more analytic work about sort of understanding approaches for it, I think is a really important important contribution. But I think we need to continue. This is an area where I think is very ripe for further work. And I think the big challenge is how then can we as agencies like USAID or others who want to support these processes, how can we develop support mechanisms, contracting grant mechanisms that are focused on supporting these kinds of constellations of efforts rather than on single organisms. Can we go to the next one? So then we move to discovery. This is essentially, the monitoring of change, and I think that again, one of the most significant and valuable contributions that SWS has made has been the willingness to experiment with looking at a variety of different tools, such as outcome harvesting, but also the application of something like social network analysis iteratively to sort of say, okay, we used it in our listening part to understand the nature of relationships and so forth. We built a process. Let's see over some time how those relationships have changed. And I think that, this was always an idea that was out there, but the fact that the SWS supported those efforts to do that kind of iterative work really has really demonstrated its value, and it has demonstrated that it is also cost effective and time effective to be able to do this kind of work. But again, I think this is another area that I think is really ripe. I mean, again, I think we're increasing the number of tools that we have available. We have, in addition to those, things like most significant change and a variety of other tools. But the real challenge is how do we essentially bring them together, use them in concert to apply them. And I think the biggest challenge, at least for agencies like ours, is I think recognizing that if we are going to be effective at monitoring systems change, we're going to have to let go of the idea of universal indicators, because systems change happens in different ways through different processes in each individual context. So we need to be willing to accept the fact that if we're serious about monitoring systems change in location A and location B, we're going to need different approaches, different tools, different indicators, understand what is going on, and that they're not going to aggregate up to some sort of universal indicator that says, yes, our portfolio of support to wash systems is effective through a single indicator. So the next one, please. The next one is adaptation, and I don't really have a lot to say about it. I mean, I think that only to say that one of the challenges with working with systems is the fundamental recognition of their dynamism, of their change, of their complexity, and therefore the relative difficulty of predicting how things will evolve. And you will need ways to you do need ways to figure out how to design for it from the beginning, expectations, design your monitoring system to allow you to learn and to be able to change. And ultimately, I think just simply to accept the fact that you may need to constantly evolve your approach, that you are not in a linear process that will lead you from A to B in very clear and regimented steps. So that's just sort of a tour of the area. And my last point, if we can go to the last slide, is just to sort of talk very, very briefly about where I see some real opportunity. Many of you may have heard that are seeing the sort of the sudden emergence and sort of attention to this concept of localization. It draws on a number, I think, of influences, both, I think, about, sort of efforts around the globe to respond to social pressures for greater inclusion and diversity on the one hand. I think a recognition of the fact, sort of looking at the world and the way that it is responding to the COVID pandemic, and the need to sort of understand and recognize dynamics that are going on, that there's not one right way to respond to the pandemic across, in all settings. But nevertheless, the localization is really taking off. The challenge that I think that we have is that in the minds of many, localization is essentially reduced down to, let's increase the number of awards, contracts, and grants that go to local actors, be they local non-governmental actors, local governments in the countries where we work, or local private sector, regardless. And I think that the importance, we've been down that road before. Local awards are certainly a part of what localization needs to be about. But I think that what we have to understand is that it's more than that. If you go back to the work that started this effort at USAID, the Local Systems Framework that came out in 2014, it talks about the importance of local ownership and local capacity. And recognizing and trying to establish true partnerships with individuals where we are not directing local actors, but where we are sharing power with them rather than trying to exert power over them. But I think that there's a growing opportunity here to recognize that all of those things, while contributing to it, need some glue to hold it together. And in my view, it's the systems practice, because it is the system that provides the context in which all of these things play out, and it is the system that is ultimately responsible for those development results that we care about in WASH or in other sectors. And so I'm pleased to say that we are currently in the midst at USAID in terms of working towards, with the administrator's encouragement, to articulate a localization agenda. And systems practice is very clearly seen as an essential element of it. And lastly, I would just say, for those of you to see sort of one of the first results of that effort, we are in the process at USAID of developing a new policy on local capacity development. And it is currently been released within the agency to receive internal reaction and comment, and it will be released shortly for external comment as well. And what I would encourage you to do, it doesn't really speak directly to WASH, but for those of you who are interested in seeing how, what I'm particularly pleased about is the fact that this is an effort, although the focus is on capacity development, it is understood that capacity needs to be understood in a systems context. And so that marrying of the local capacity and the systems practice and the ownership is alive in this draft policy. And I hope you will recognize that it's there, but also if you have some suggestions about how we can strengthen it, you have the opportunity both internally and externally to provide comments. With that, I want to conclude, but I just again to recognize, I think, the remarkable contributions that this project has made. I hope to the WASH sector, although I'm less aware of its impact there, but it certainly has had very positive influence on the conversations around systems and systems practice at USAID.
Thank you, Chip, for that talk. And there's a lot of activity in the chat box. So I definitely encourage you to kind of go in and read some of the comments and pick up on some of the really good discussion there. People are definitely responding to the points you're making. What we're hearing is a directive to really move away from proof of concept to embracing systems practice. And then you've helped kind of walk us through how to do this. I do want to take the opportunity to ask you one question. There are certainly several things I could pick up on the chat, but just recognizing where we're at with time. We have kind of a really interesting discussion with Chris, Raisa, and Rebecca weighing in on this idea of breaking down silos, right? So community members don't operate within silos, we know that, and there's really, I think, what we're hearing is a need to identify synergies across sectors, including WASH, health, agriculture. They listed a couple of tools, for example, human-centered design and journey mapping to help us do that. But the question is, like, do you see opportunities to really refocus on users within the system and break down silos through systems practice?
Well, yes, obviously. I think that one of the real strengths of systems thinking and systems practice. One of them is that you can't, if you are being honest, you just can't sort of limit yourself as you're sort of trying to understand the nature of a system, sort of say, well, I'm only going to be interested in the water and sanitation aspects of it, the health aspects or the nutrition aspects or the agricultural aspects of where the water is going, I'm just going to ignore, because that is inherently a part of your system. So I think that just the orientation of it just sort of is naturally cross-sectoral. But I think the other advantage is that particularly if we can, be consistent with our terminology and our approaches, is that systems thinking provides a vehicle for people with different technical perspectives to actually work on problems in common, because you have, a social network analysis map does not look any different if it's being applied to a health context or a WASH context or an education context. And so these are tools that we can use in common. They provide a basis for a common language, and I think that that's one way that it fosters that cross-fertilization. And I'm very pleased to see that there is work on it. One of the other areas where that's happening is in the use of concepts that are cross-cutting. So, for example, within USAID, this idea about resilience and resilience as a characteristic of systems may have started in one part of our agency, but it is spreading. And I think that it, as a consequence of this interest in a concept like resilience or sustainability, it really does in fact foster more commonality that we need to look at the same problem from multiple perspectives.
Great. Thanks so much, Chip. And Chip will be sticking around, so again, keep those comments and questions coming in the chat. But I will now transition to our main presenters for today and reintroduce Carl Linden and Amy Jabernick-Will from the University of Colorado at Boulder. Carl and Amy are the principal investigators for SWS. Carl is a professor in environmental engineering. Through his research, he supports the development of innovative treatment technologies, improvement of water quality, and establishment of enabling environments. Amy is a professor in civil, environmental, and architectural engineering. Her research lies at the intersection of society and built infrastructure, studying the processes that enable sustained, safe service delivery in communities for water, sanitation, and shelter. We'll hear from Amy first.
Thanks, Brittany, and thanks, Chip, for such a great talk. I also wanted to thank our attendees for spending your time with us at our 4 previous closeout events and today. I know I've been learning tons in the chat, and I really appreciate all of your participation. We're going to be recapping findings from our work, discussions from the last 2 weeks, and recommendations based upon these findings. During this, I want to invite you to continue to participate in the chat, specifically indicating what do you think should be next for the sector. And we'll turn to some of those shared recommendations later in the session. At our opening session, Carl and I shared the SWS theory of change, which focused on understanding and strengthening local systems to sustain WASH services, and largely follows a systems practice just described by Chip. Because sustaining outcomes depends on those contributions of multiple and interconnected actors, in SWS we started with the premise that strengthening a local system really means engaging with the actors in that system to first understand the system and collectively identify needs and priorities. Act, which I've seen a lot of people commenting on, action is needed to strengthen the system, both by strengthening collaboration of actors and addressing key factors such as financing. Along the way, we're measuring that change. We're continuously adapting, iterating, and learning from changes in the system, and that's all towards our goal of improving service sustainability. Many learning activities were employed along the process, and we shared testimonials of challenges, learning, and achievements from our multiple partners who have been fantastic in Uganda, Ethiopia, Kenya, and Cambodia. In the subsequent 3 sessions, we took those deep dives into our priority learning themes, including systems understanding, which encompasses both stakeholder understanding and network analysis, professionalized service models, and collective action. We want to revisit these findings and their recommendations.
Thanks, Amy. I want to echo your thanks to Chip as well. That was a great reflection on systems approaches we undertook in our project. And I want to thank you all also for participating with us today and throughout our closeout events. I think we've really shown how partnerships between universities and academic research in concert with local actors can really yield some significant results and help us move forward with the sector. And obviously one of these areas is stakeholder understanding. Our approach to stakeholder understanding, the research topic, has really investigated how systems level understanding by stakeholders was changing during the 5 years of our project, and if this understanding actually appeared to be leading to the identification of priorities that improve system strengthening efforts towards sustainable water and sanitation services. This task entailed interviewing water and sanitation stakeholders at different points in time, where we asked them questions related to the challenges and solutions to sustainable service delivery. Transcribed interviews were analyzed to pull out causal statements to piece together an assessment for how regional stakeholders understood factor interaction and how these interactions have shifted over time. This analysis produced 2 key findings that provide insights into how SWS activities have shifted stakeholders' understanding of WASH systems. Firstly, the study shows a shift toward a more service delivery-oriented perspective of WASH systems, emphasizing an increase in the importance of O&M in the private sector, government management, and long-term planning. The shift also highlighted a decrease in stakeholders viewing external finance and community and users as solutions to sustainable services. Secondly, the analysis showed the measurable effect that turnover in local coalitions has on the alignment of how stakeholders view key factors for WASH services, highlighting the importance of institutional knowledge and group consensus building. Taken together, these findings point to some key recommendations for the WASH sector. First, you can use systems approaches to shift stakeholder understanding of key factors for sustainable service delivery. Implementation of collective action and preventative maintenance approaches can be keys to improve alignment of stakeholder perspectives. And lastly, don't underestimate the impact that turnover of key personnel has on group alignment. And use stakeholder understanding assessments to evaluate shifts in understanding and explore the nuances of local stakeholder perspectives. The main products from our stakeholder understanding work includes a flagship report, which is now available on the SWS Global Water site, and we have an upcoming webinar to be held on October 27th, where the research team will explore these findings in more detail and bring in perspectives of 2 Learning Alliance facilitators. Registration information for the webinar should be forthcoming in the next 2 weeks or so keep a lookout for it in your inbox.
Great. In our next deep dive network analysis, we use social network analysis to analyze the relationships among actors to plan strategies of who should be included in coalitions, how groups are sharing information and coordinating, and to measure if our interventions were working. Throughout the consortium, we conducted 19 network analyses for 8 networks in 4 countries. Teams used social network analysis to design their activity. This included understanding the structure of networks, such as identifying missing actors that should be included, determining existing subgroups or coalitions within the larger network, and determining which actors were central to or on the periphery of the network. It also helped us identify collaboration gaps, such as disconnects, for the figure, between district-level stakeholders and user communities in Kabarole, Uganda, and the need to strengthen coordination between political and technical actors in Kamuli, Uganda. It helped us to target and shape interventions, including those central actors that could facilitate network discussion. It provided outreach to missing actors so that they would be included in coordination platforms and elevate actors to the same level of understanding of water issues in Kitui. And it helped to plan actions, such as in Wawiso, Ethiopia, where they illustrated an ideal network for executing community awareness campaigns to set actions towards building those ideal networks. We also used social network analysis to monitor changes in networks to determine if our interventions were working. For instance, many interventions focused on increasing collaboration, which was shown by monitoring change in the network. In Kitui, for example, connections between actors increased nearly 4 times. Next slide. We also learned lessons and have recommendations, including choosing the right analysis tool for your WASH program's needs. Social network analysis is the right tool to choose when relationships and interactions among program stakeholders are important for achieving your programmatic goals. Thus, you need to be clear on the purpose of the social network analysis in your WASH program, including the primary audience and why understanding relationships will help you to achieve your goals. Specific design decisions should flow directly from the social network analysis purpose and be aligned. For example, your network boundary should align with whether you are working with an existing coalition, if you're forming a new coalition, or you're working within the structure of relationships among stakeholders in an informal network. If your key target audience is local stakeholders, we found that it's helpful to focus more on qualitative understanding of the network and visual representation of the findings rather than the quantitative metrics and technical reports. You also really need to invest time and resources to integrate social network analysis into the program activities. Ensuring that it's integrated into the program and MEL activities does require some upfront training and time commitment from the team above their other existing work. However, we found that those investments vastly improved the value of SNA for the implementation team and the stakeholders. It improves the use of findings, helps to shift mindsets, and really helps to catalyze action. Relatedly, you need to engage stakeholders directly in the social network analysis, data collection, analysis, and validation. While it can be technical and is used in complex social situations, we found that the concepts, findings, and visualizations are intuitive for stakeholders. Engaging stakeholders provides significant benefits. For instance, social network analysis can explain how a network is structured, but it can't explain why. Stakeholders are the best way to put the findings into the context. Stakeholders can also get value from the social network analysis as it allows them to understand others' perspectives, step back from day-to-day details to see the bigger picture of their work, and identify how to change their own behavior to improve collective results. When you're doing this, it's also important to take into account ethical and reputational considerations for sharing. Network findings can offend stakeholders that are not as influential in the network as they thought. So do share these with right? We have many products available on the Global Waters SWS website related to network analysis, including reports, webinars, videos, and trainings. But our flagship report was just released using social network analysis and WASH programs, and we hope that you enjoy it. Over to Carl.
Thanks, Amy. So on to professionalized maintenance. The professionalized maintenance session this past Monday included breakout sessions for in-depth discussions. When we focused on financing professionalized maintenance, we focused on maintenance as a political priority, we focused on institutional arrangements. It also featured a panel of experts from USAID, the World Bank, and major implementing partners. We hope you're able to attend this dynamic interactive webinar. In this session, we broke down this roadmap here toward professionalized maintenance, illustrated here on the slide, to look at these individual components as well as their intersections and discuss the implications for funders like USAID and its partners and development partners in general. We recognize that political champions and leaders play important roles to strengthen these factors, and that any viable professionalized maintenance provision must also generate and provide data and evidence to further strengthen these important factors. In the main panel session, there was a general consensus that supporting systems that can deliver improved maintenance outcomes is a core part of USAID's work and builds off their broader water and agency policies of self-reliance. But this is not an easy thing to do in practice, and there is work to do internally, advocacy within the agency and within external partners to get full buy-in throughout the agencies. We recognize that political support, specifically from senior government and technocrat staff, is really key for scaling up professionalized maintenance. For example, at the local level, to ensure that service areas are respected and common tariff structures can be applied. We also recognize that subsidies are required, but they need to be smart and targeted. Also, the channels for delivery of subsidies need to be transparent and shared through accountability platforms. An example from our SWS program is the trust fund model from Kenya, which has been established via the new Kitui County Water Bill, which acknowledges rural water services, requires subsidies, and establishes transparent mechanisms for channeling of public subsidies to rural water services, including to maintenance providers, which, unlike the formal urban water services, have not been eligible for direct funding through county budgets to date. Finally, supporting improved maintenance needs the right policies and regulations in place and to be applied in practice, as well as good coordination. For example, the new national framework for O&M in Uganda is a great step forward and sets out required actions, but this still needs to be operationalized on the ground, which can only be done through stakeholder dialogue and direct work with local governments, with communities, the private sector, and other stakeholders. Next slide. A number of important messages came out of our breakout sessions and overall analyses. These include the importance of influencing politicians at different levels of government, build the evidence base for policy change. But we realize this takes a lot of time and persistence. Another important message from our session last Monday was that the learning alliances, the policy dialogues, and the peer exchanges hosted by SWS have been essential to bring attention to the extent of the problems of non-functionality and the lack of maintenance services. And finally, we all now clearly recognize that incentives for non-government investors to support maintenance services must also include a focus on corporate social responsibility and economic and social returns, in lieu often of direct financial returns, which may actually not be realized. We have a number of recommendations aimed at donors, implementers, and government that came out of our analysis. Our recommendations for funding agencies include: use your leverage with government to support strengthening gaps in policy, in institutional arrangements, and across regulatory frameworks. Please ensure that investments for new or major rehabilitation of water supply infrastructure do not disrupt or undermine existing arrangements. And it is imperative that adequate arrangements are in place for professionalized maintenance services before committing to major investments, or this funding may actually be wasted. For implementers, in the next slide, our recommendations include: make sure to coordinate with local government authorities within the system boundary and inform them of planned interventions before they start. Be aware of tariff regimes and subsidy mechanisms, and never, and we mean never, undercut established levels of payment for maintenance. And please share your data with local government and other actors, but avoid establishing parallel monitoring frameworks or data platforms that do not integrate with the national frameworks. Lastly, we have recommendations for advocacy groups working to influence government. These include consider engaging with government on policy reform and legislation or regulatory frameworks that can support improved approaches, such as professionalized maintenance, towards sustained rural water service delivery. Advocate directly with politicians, cultural and business leaders to expose them to evidence about the importance of long-term professionalized maintenance and build strong alliances that work toward policy change. Finally, please document well-researched and tested approaches and disseminate such learning broadly and intentionally to expand the sector knowledge about good practice. We also have a number of flagship products. These findings and more can be accessed in numerous reports and briefs as we have cataloged on the USAID Global Waters website. They include a flagship report from our partner Wave Solutions that presents 10 factors considered key viability of sustained and consistent service delivery. And we have 2 forthcoming publications, our overall maintenance research flagship report, which contains all the details of our research methodologies and our findings, as well as a specialty report from our partner at Oxford on shifting legal and policy processes to promote professionalized maintenance in Kitui County, Kenya. Now over to Amy for a collective action discussion.
Thanks, Carl, and please continue to share some recommendations that you may have for the sector in that chat. Just yesterday, we did a deep dive into collective action. Under collective action, we studied factors that collaboratively strengthened WASH systems and also documented the resource required for these approaches. While we found that there wasn't one single formula to apply, our research uncovered 5 core elements that worked together in different ways to make progress, including local government uptake, the availability of external funds for the coalition's activities, having continuity and accountability in the coalition's membership, having a hub with convening power, and collaboratively identifying problems and solutions. Some points related to these pathways to progress include that one item in particular that had a ton of discussion yesterday was this obtaining government support, which is critical to functioning WASH systems. Thus, getting the right government decision makers to see value in the effort and to allocate budget or shift their priorities was a critical step towards progress. SWS teams reported that government support was acquired and maintained through frequent communication and engagement with government officials and continuous demonstration of the value of the coalition and alignment of its activities with government-mandated objectives. There are different starting points for collaboration, such as collective problem identification, analysis-based identification, and applying or demonstrating a concept or solution. Each of these carry different risks and benefits for buy-in and for government support. A strong hub is one with the capacity to organize, facilitate, and follow up on meetings, and convening power, or the influence and ability to bring people together for meetings and act. In SWS, we saw that the hub could be a government entity that is respected, has decision-making power, and holds a mandate related to the topic of the coalition. Or the hub could be a non-government entity that has a long history in the area before the coalition began and also had established working relationships, high respect and influence, social capital, expertise in the subject area, and strong local knowledge. External funds for not only convening the coalitions, but also funding the activities of these coalitions is critical. For example, to establish databases, develop policies, create master plans, or to construct infrastructure or monitoring systems. Next slide. Based on the findings, the team had the following recommendations for collective action in our report. For WASH implementing organizations, we suggest working with local stakeholders to develop a common understanding of the local system and align the approach with local experience and contextual constraints. Rigid timelines and structures are really difficult to maintain because local systems are unpredictable and subject to frequent disruption. Allowing flow in schedules and flexible structures to adapt will help the coalition. Encourage regular attendance by representatives that are knowledgeable in the subject who are authorized to make decisions. and ensure that key local government agencies attend, lead, and participate. Make government leadership of the group a priority, whether or not the government is the owner of the hub. For government agencies, recognize that collective action platforms can help officials fulfill their mandates. In the studied cases, local government officials regularly praised collective action efforts and in a few instances moved to formalize them as official government structures. Government officials appreciated that the platforms helped them know what others are doing, foster agreement and coordination between stakeholders, and to understand current challenges and opportunities. Due to their strong convening power, it is still critical that government actors are involved in the coalition, especially in convening the stakeholders, ensuring that the right people attend the meetings, and aligning group priorities with those of government. Finally, for funders, when reviewing proposals from program leads, we encourage you to look for experience with collaborative approaches, knowledge of the local area, and connections with local actors. If they are proposing work in a new area, how do they propose to gain convening power? And have they described strategies to gain and obtain government uptake? Government uptake of our recommendations from the coalition can even serve as a reliable metric to track progress for monitoring and evaluation. Government uptake means their commitment and action, and this can be shown through allocation of budget, financial or in-kind support for activity implementation, or the passing of policies. Funders should also look to see the proposed form of problem identification, whether it's collaborative or a pre-existing solution, and that matches with the local context and their organizational role. For example, if they intend to implement a predetermined solution but are proposing collective problem identification, then they risk delays and stakeholder frustration if the agreed upon solution conflicts with the program scope. Funders should also set expectations that include realistic timelines. It takes several years for coalitions to build trust and strong relationships and to establish accountability mechanisms, even if the approach builds on existing platforms and networks. And consider making a pool of funding available for the coalition to use for collaborative activities beyond hub functions and the cost of regular meetings. Next slide. Please refer to our hot off the press report that just got released this week, Collective Action in WASH, Lessons and Findings from 11 Collaborative Approaches in the WASH Sector. In addition, our partner IRC's flagship report, Driving Change, Strengthening Local Systems for Better Public Services, is forthcoming, along with several other products that are available on our website. I've been seeing the chat dinging, but I haven't been reading it. So Brittany, are there any recommendations that you're seeing for the sector?
Yeah, thanks, Amy and Carl. I do want to share a few recommendations I'm picking up from the chat, and also great to see so many of you forming, it looks like, some new connections. So I think that we'll have attendees continuing the conversation after our closeout event, which is really exciting. So one recommendation from Rich is just as a sector, we really need to get good at measuring the investment or results of supporting the social and political process pathway from Chip's presentation at the beginning of our session. And I think that this also came up in our panel discussion yesterday on collective action. And then another recommendation, picking up on a conversation from Harold and Rebecca, is that external actors need to be more aware of their influence on the system, just based on what they decide to do or not do. And I think that this was a big theme under our maintenance research, where, for example, NGOs offering to install new infrastructure for free can really jeopardize efforts to professionalize services. So those are just two of the recommendations, but lots of really interesting discussion in the chat. I will now turn it over to Nicholas Valcourt briefly. Nick is the co-founder of Open Water Systems, and he's going to be sharing some preliminary findings from our systems survey. Over to you, Nick.
Thanks, Brittany. Okay, I'm just gonna wait for, thank you so much. So I wanted to share some of the preliminary results from the survey that Brittany had shared at the beginning of the session and asked everyone to respond to. The question here was, what are the key factors and their connections for success for WASH service sustainability? And what you see here on the slide is a screenshot of an interactive map that we put up on the Kumu platform that visualizes connections between some of the key concepts that people mentioned in their responses. The moderators can share a link to this map now, and we will also send out an updated map in tomorrow's SWS Learning Note. So in this map that we're looking at, the factors that came out of these responses here are colored based on some preliminary categories that we put them in, like financial, institutional, or environmental. And the size of each circle represents its relative centrality or degree of connections to all the other factors in the map. Additionally, the connections between these, the strength of them, is categorized as weak in the light gray, moderate in the dark gray, and strong in the red, based on the number of times that people mention these factors in combination with one another. But what I think is interesting here in these preliminary results from the survey is that most of the influential factors that we see here have some social dimension to them, like accountability and trust, as well as some other aspects of local capacity, coordination, and institutional capacity. And looking at the map here, we see that the strongest connection identified so far is actually between accountability and local capacity. Again, this is based on the responses to your survey. So I'm interested to see how these results change as more of the responses come in. So if you haven't filled that survey out yet, please follow that link and share your thoughts with us. And also look for an update on this map tomorrow in our learning note. And please feel free to reach out with any comments, questions, or feedbacks. Okay, Brittany, now back to you and Ryan for some closing comments.
Great, thanks, Nick. So we've asked Ryan Mahoney to provide some closing remarks. Ryan is a WASH advisor at USAID Center for Water Security, Sanitation, and Hygiene, where he provides WASH technical support to missions, crafts guidance on monitoring, evaluation, and learning, and participates in strategic partnerships. We are very lucky to have Ryan as our AOR on SWS. Over to you, Ryan.
All right, hi everyone. Hopefully you can see me. I'm not going to rehash all the successes I think the project has had. I think that, all the presenters today have done a great job. I do want to thank everyone for joining us for so many for the 5th day of the learning series. And and thanks, and just encourage you to stick around for the final component, which is the World Cafe, where we're really curious to get more of your ideas and hopefully foster some of the connections that we're seeing come through in the chats. But overall, I think SWS has found that systems assessments are critical as the starting point for any WASH intervention. SWS collectively conducted 16 different types of systems assessments, including asset inventories, building blocks assessments, financial analysis, network analysis, outcome mapping, host sensor analysis, and sustainability assessment. So these are often participatory and conducted and validated by local stakeholders. So 2 of our partners, FundiFix in Kenya and Wave Solutions in Uganda, implemented professionalized maintenance approaches over the project's 5 years, and each demonstrated substantial evidence that providing scheduled mechanical maintenance and repairs to water infrastructure and systems can ensure that water services remain highly functional and cost effective. With that, SWS also implemented collective action approaches in 4 countries, either establishing multi-stakeholder platforms where they not previously exist, or building on new ones, building on previous ones. And these platforms achieved a wide range of outcomes, most of which were successful in solving complex problems, and all of which contribute to the review of case studies on collective actions, which was presented yesterday. I think the USAID's learning programs such as SWS, aren't just occurring in a silo. They're building on kind of a broader set of building on our broader evidence cycle, what we kind of refer to it as. And one of those components of the evidence cycle are USAID's our Water and Development Technical Brief series, which started, we have 12 technical sub-series that we focus on that are published in the past 2 years. And, these kind of pull together the state of the evidence today. pulling from research projects like SWS. I will say that, especially, I'm putting these in the chats right now, the links there, and I'll say especially the Rural Water Technical Brief, which it includes a lot of SWS case studies and call-out boxes, and then our recently released Governance Tech Brief also references SWS deliverables throughout the report, and has an entire section on collective action and the importance of collective action on local governance. So, I think this kind of tries to distill the current evidence that USAID we see out there. But of course, USAID is not done on learning on these topics. And in 2020, we released our Water for the World Implementation Research Agenda, and which presents the outlines of the critical research questions for the sector, many of which kind of resulted from new questions that came to us through the SWS project and our other investments in learning. So I'll put that in the chats as well. So folks will, of course, USAID will be making investments in the future on some of these research questions, but obviously we see this as more of a sector good, and that can respond to others that are considering what are the critical learning questions they need to inform. But we put this out there for everyone to hopefully contribute to, and so we can learn it over time. Overall, all this implementation guidance and this learning that we're conducting is all in support of the U.S. government's global water strategy. The first U.S. government-wide global water strategy was released in 2017, and that strategy elevated governance and finance as critical preconditions for sustained water service delivery. So they elevated them as development result number one, and this was informed by learning activities like SWS and its predecessors. So we're actually beginning consultations for an upcoming revision to the global water strategy in 2023, and wanted to take this opportunity to encourage everyone to offer their input. In coordination with the Department of State, USAID is accepting comments through the Federal Register, and I'll put the link where we're looking for people's input on the current global water strategy, which is from 2017 to 2022, and what types of revisions that people would like to see. And we're also holding a public event on November 17th to collect input from stakeholders like yourselves. So all of these events will be publicized on Global Waters and on the Global Waters newsletter. So if you're not registered for that, I encourage you to go to globalwaters.org and register. And while you're on globalwaters.org, you can just add a /SWS to see all the knowledge products that SWS has provided. We've organized a very efficient and clean-looking microsite on the SWS Global Waters page, and it's organized by the learning area, collective and collaborative approaches, professionalized maintenance, and systems understanding and engagement. So while we hope these last 2 weeks have provided a glimpse into many of the lessons and findings from the SWS consortium, we also invite you to review our over 100, and it's growing by the day, products that are available at the globalwaters.org SWS site. You'll find our latest resources, a curated set of resources, and all the information that we've been using to pull together this closeout event. And then in the last few months of the project, we'll be adding some more flagship products that were given a sneak peek on today. And overall, another notable product to look for on there is a bibliography of SWS products. This will actually be shared in tomorrow's learning note, so keep an eye on your inbox there for annotated bibliography of SWS products, as well as all the recordings for all of our closeout sessions, in case you missed any. And finally, we're going to end on a World Cafe to give you one last opportunity to hear from SWS partners, and as well as share your ideas on some new topics. You can go to the next slide. Table 1 of the World Cafe will focus on enabling environments for professionalized maintenance, focusing on how do we create the conditions necessary for professionalism to take effect in the maintenance of wash services. Table 2 will look at securing government commitment for collective action. Obviously, we found local government support is critical for success of solving problems in our sector, and the question is how do we get that commitment? So we'd love to hear from you in Table 2. Table 3 will look at digital monitoring tools for water supply maintenance. This is something that SWS has done a lot on, and we didn't have so much time to focus on it during this closeout event, but definitely wanted to hear your input at Table 3. And finally, Table 4 will look at measuring systems change with outcome mapping, a particularly advantageous methodology for measuring, for capturing the outcomes that are, as Chip mentioned, just very complex sometimes in the systems work. So with that, I just have to thank all the SWS consortium partners. I'll list them all out. Their logos are down there, bottom, but University of Colorado Boulder as the prime and environmental incentives, IRC, Link, Tetra Tech, University of Oxford, Watershed, and WAVE. I'd also like to thank our advisory board members who were really, made valuable contributions to the project over the course of the 5 years, and many of whom you actually heard from in this closeout event, including Chip Walker from USAID, Heather Skilling from DAI, Louis Morstan from Osprey Foundation, Adib Mahmood from FSG, Vincent Casey from WaterAid, Jenna Davis from Stanford University, Aaron Kabrizi from the Ministry of Water and Environment in Uganda. So with that, I also have to thank our panelists and keynote speakers. There's too many from these 5 days to list, but I learned a lot from the discussions and from the presentations. It was truly an enriching discussion on WASH local systems and service sustainability. So, and overall, I also wanted to send a shout out to the previous AORs for the activity. Since I only took over pretty recently, I want to give a big thanks to Liz Jordan, who really made this project run and get to some really tangible outcomes, I think, on making impacts in the system space, as well as before that, Ella Lazarte, who got the project up and running. And as was mentioned before, previous chief of parties, I really appreciate their work. It was a team effort to get this 5-year project up and running and off the ground, and getting the learnings through everywhere in the subsectors and in the system space, as well as WASH stakeholders. So, and finally, you all, I really appreciate so much engagement from the attendees during this session. I got the sense that everyone's really paying close attention and very active in the chats and the Q&A and responding to each other. It's been really exciting to see every day that there's such a strong level of engagement. So with that, I'd like to continue that conversation in smaller groups, hopefully, and we can hand things over to Katie now to facilitate the World Cafe.
Thank you, Ryan. So many people to thank for this project. It's inspiring. So I am just going to frame, just take a few minutes to frame what we're going to do. I'm going to be brief. What is a World Cafe? A World Cafe is, simply put, it's just a way to build off of a dialogue and create like a living network for you to kind of go beyond this event. And so next slide, please. Great. And so as Ryan kind of pointed out, each of these table topics, each of these tables will have a topic and some guiding questions to help facilitate the conversation. In a moment, I'm going to share in the link where you can go to one of those 4 different table areas. We're going to be allowing at least 2 rounds. So the first round will be about 20 minutes. And then you'll have an opportunity to go back to the link and go into another room. So you'll be able to see 2 out of 4 of those rounds. If you choose to stay in the current room that you are in, or the first room that you choose, please feel free to, if you feel like it's contributing to your work and addressing some questions or challenges that you're currently working with. Next slide, please. We really wanted to ensure like that this was an opportunity for you to really engage on these topics. So just a few kind of guiding principles that we want to highlight. Each room will have a lead and a co-lead to help kind of set the context and really create like a nice environment, a nice virtual space for you to feel comfortable sharing and exploring the content with them. And so we just want to make sure that you are acknowledging the diverse perspectives that you hear in the room, and make sure that you're listening to each other and really drawing out any patterns or insights that you might be hearing around your topic. So next slide. Again here, Ryan reviewed with you the different table topics. And so I'm just going to quickly share with you the rooms. So room 1 will be facilitated by Caleb and Liz from WAVE, who you've heard earlier in the sessions. Room 2 will be Kimmy from UCB and Lucia from Tetra Tech, also key presenters from Collective Action yesterday. Room 3 will be Anna from UCB, as well as Brett from IRC on digital monitoring tools for water supply maintenance. And then finally, the last room, room 4, is around measuring systems. And that will be facilitated by Elizabeth from Environmental Incentives and Cliff from Oxford University. So I am dropping a link in, I believe I did already, to the Google site, and you will find your breakout rooms. Please feel free to transition there to your breakout rooms where you'll be met by your host. And feel free to close out of this Blue Jeans session. We will keep this open though, in case you have any problems going back, but somebody will be there on the other end to meet you in Zoom and make sure that everything is set up for you to transition after 20 minutes. With that, I don't see any questions coming in the chat box. I really like to encourage you to go now, select your room, who you want to, where you want to kind of dig in for the next 20 minutes. And then we'll transition you to another round around 10:40 to then kind of close everything out. So thank you, everyone. I will just stay here to see if there's any questions.